Hello and welcome to another episode of Cake Fight Presents The Making of Kaleidoscope. I'm writer, director, producer Paige Feldman, and this week, as every week, I'm taking you inside my process of making my debut feature film. We're going from idea to premiere in real time. So everyone, I'm so excited. I'm halfway through the rewrite of my giant first draft of Kaleidoscope. I am at the midpoint page count-wise today, and in just a couple days I will be at the midpoint story-wise, which is Lee and Jonah's first kiss. And if you've watched this channel at all, you probably know how much I love a good kissing scene. But as I approach that point, there's a conundrum, there's a problem that I've been just kind of trying to figure out what to do. And as I approach this first kiss scene, it's becoming more and more imperative that I solve it. I anticipated and was hoping and was trying to construct the story that I'm telling in Kaleidoscope so that it would be really sexy. And not just sexy, but there would be a lot of sex in it. I want to make sex-positive romantic comedies. I want to show that sex can be a way to help grow a relationship, shed these puritanical values that a lot of romantic comedies exist on. However, sex doesn't make sense early on for my characters. For the story I want to tell, the other themes that I want to talk about, and the personal journeys that each character is on, it's not the right choice. So the question I'm asking now is, how do I communicate this sexiness and sex positivity without a lot of sex in my film? One of the great things about writing a script that I know I'm going to direct is that I can start thinking about how I'm going to solve this, not just in terms of story, but in terms of finding a visual language to communicate Lee and Jonah's relationship, to add some steaminess, to add some sexiness in moments when there's not even sex happening or on the brain. Just show that connection between them. I have found an amazing example, and I want to share it all with you, of a piece of media that shows sexiness without barely any sex. It aligns itself really well with the way that I like to direct, the way that I like to frame things, and the mise-en-scène that I privilege. As I studied it more and more, I realized it turns the male gaze on its head in a pretty extreme way, which, as a feminist film nerd, I find super exciting. The piece of media is Bridgerton Season 2, and I am going to explain to you what the male gaze is if you're not a film nerd like me, why it matters, how I'm going to incorporate this visual style into my work, and I'm gonna break down a scene for you that is very sexy without a lot of sex. And I'm gonna do all of that right after we roll those titles. So like any good 21st century creator, I have a brand statement. I actually have a few depending on what job I'm putting myself up for or who I'm talking to, but my favorite one, and the one that I always go to if I'm not sure what to use, is that I'm reinventing the romantic comedy for the 21st century. Now what that means to me is that I am taking the paradigm of the romantic comedy as we know it, which is, in short, a beautiful, tall, blonde Aryan man and a cute, demure, slightly awkward, relatable, not too intimidating Aryan woman meet in a strange and charming way, stumble through a series of misunderstandings, and find love that completes their already impossibly perfect lives in their beautiful kitchens, then their way too large apartments in the middle of large cities that they probably couldn't afford unless the characters were actually the actors playing them. So that's the paradigm. And my goal as a filmmaker is to create a new paradigm for this genre that reflects the world that we live in terms of diversity, not just race, but gender and sexual identity, ability, body type, and religion. It's very close to my heart because I'm Jewish, and I want to tell stories about Jews in love because I've really never seen myself reflected in a romantic comedy. So I want to tell stories about Jews in love, but also people who look all certain ways and who identify in all certain ways in love. And I did some of that in Interrobang, my short form comedy anthology. I also want to change the way that the genre works in terms of how we portrayed the lives of our characters, because everyone in these romantic comedies, that I still love them, but they're usually pretty successful, especially in the more modern, in the last 20, 30 years. There's lots of advertising executives and high-powered associates and things. My protagonists are people who have their own goals and dreams and who are striving for more. They have things they want to reach. And love is something that helps them push further towards their goals. I want to show that following your dreams and finding love are not mutually exclusive things. You don't have to choose between being a career woman or following your heart. Jonah in Kaleidoscope, the film that I'm writing, wants to be a stand-up comedian more than anything. So I don't want my characters to already have impossibly perfect lives. I want them to be messy. And I want the relationship between the characters to be something that is an impetus for them to do more, push themselves further towards their dreams, show them that they are capable and valuable. Because good love, real love, it's about you and your partner or partners supporting each other, lifting each other up, and seeing all the potential you have and proving to you that you can do it. And it's empowerment. Additionally, sex in a lot of these romantic comedies is something that goes like fade to black or is off screen or doesn't even happen within the diegesis of the film. Sex in the 21st century is an important part of a relationship. It's an important part to determine compatibility. And I want to explore how sex changes a relationship and how it also can help a relationship grow and elevate it to the next level or complicate things or maybe even make things better. I don't want sex to be something that is viewed as a pinnacle or that is equated with I love you. It can have an emotional meaning, but it doesn't have to be on this level of love. Basically, I want to show that it's okay to do things with your bodies with somebody that makes you feel good, as long as everyone's consenting and it's not hurting anyone. And finally, well, I guess apart from comedy, because it's a romantic comedy, it's in the name. I want you to be laughing. I expect there to be actual jokes in my films. Not just a general lighthearted romance, actual romantic comedy. But finally, apart from that, is feminism. The romantic comedy is a tricky genre. There's a lot about love being the one thing that's going to complete our protagonist's life, and typically, especially as we move into more modern day romantic comedies, a woman is a protagonist in it. But love is not something, romantic love is not something that a woman needs to make her life complete. I mean, that's like basics. So I want to think about how I construct the plots to show that love is something that helps people, not just women, but men and women, non-binary, any gender, people, that inspires them to do better for themselves. And another thing I want to think about, especially because I'm a writer-director and not only a writer, is how I communicate all that in a visual language. And how do I communicate a woman's autonomy alongside her striving for love? And how do I do that within a visual sense? So my undergraduate degree is from the University of Southern California. I have a BA cum laude in Cinematic Arts Critical Studies, which means that I am professionally certified to talk about film history and criticism and theories. And when I say film criticism, I don't mean this movie's good and this movie's bad, Roger Ebert, 2 thumbs up. I mean about a critical analysis of movies as texts, in the same way that you might analyze a novel in English class. That's what I do with films. So, as I'm considering the visual language that I want to bring to my work, how I want to incorporate sex positivity and feminism, I like to turn to some old classic film history and criticism, reading some film theories. And my favorite basis for all of this, and any feminist film student's favorite basis for all of their thought, I'm guessing, whether you love it or hate it, is Laura Mulvey's seminal essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. It was from 1975. I have my copy of it right here, and I have it highlighted and stuff. There's notes on it. This essay is what gave us the iconic phrase, the male gaze. I'm sure that if you are at all familiar with film theory discussion, you've heard this male gaze thing. I'm going to explain it very briefly because this essay is very much a product of its time. It's very outdated. I find it problematic and inaccurate in a lot of ways, but I also find it really useful as a basis for thinking about how women are portrayed in film versus how men are portrayed in film. Now this essay, it's very heteronormative. It's based on psychoanalysis. It's based on Freud. So you know that it's going to be kind of sexist and there's a lot of not good about it, guys. It is useful in terms of thinking about what the camera's doing, what the narrative's doing, and how we can break patterns in order to make cinema more egalitarian. So here we go. So in Laura Mulvey's essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, she talks about the mode of cinema itself as an expression of male fantasy. She says that movies aren't necessarily set up to be that way, but the conventions of producing them have created a world wherein when we're on the screen, we are looking at the people on the screen through the gaze of a heterosexual male. And that's where the idea of the male gaze comes from. So in this world we've set up, men are the actors. Whether they are the protagonists in the film who the story is happening because of their own actions, or they're the people in the audience who are looking at the screen, who are voyeurs, who are gaining pleasure from watching people do things who cannot see them, who are maybe looking in on something that's happened that might be illicit in some way. Obviously, not only men are the ones who go to the movies. There are women, there are people of color, and because this is an overwhelmingly heterosexual theory, there are also people who are not straight who are going to movies. But the point of this isn't the composition of the film's audience. The point of this is that the film itself is made with a man in mind. He is the one who is the actor. He is the one who is doing the looking. He is the one who is directing the camera in a way. Obviously, the directors, the actual physical directors, are overwhelmingly white and male, especially in 1975, and continues on to this day. But when I say directing the camera, that's another part of Mulvey's theory, is that there is a certain verisimilitude that is required for films to be successful within the context of what cinema looks like in Hollywood, especially at the time. She says that there is a certain need for the camera to be an invisible eye on the wall, to show you exactly what you want to see, for the editing to be seamless, for the movements of the cameras to not make themselves obvious. When you see a shot of something, whether it's a whole body or a piece of it or a landscape, it's because that's where the eye of the viewer and the eye of the protagonist want to go. Now, the women within this world are all objects, and there's a lot of weird psychoanalysis stuff that involves women being a castration threat, and men who are in the films have two choices, and that is to lower these women and expose them for the villains they are, like in a film noir, or to make them so fetishized that they don't pose any risk because they are no longer a person, they are an object. So I'm gonna read a couple segments because right in the introduction to this essay, Mulvey says, film reflects, reveals, and even plays on the straight, socially established interpretation of sexual difference, which controls images and erotic ways of looking and spectacle. So cinema controls eroticism, and women as objects are eroticized through the camera breaking them up in pieces. Or in the case of Rear Window, which is a fantastic Hitchcock movie, hopefully you all have seen it. If you haven't, you should. It's great. Jimmy Stewart, Grace Kelly, Thelma Ritter. Amazing cast, amazing film. Mulvey makes the point that Jeffries, who's Jimmy Stewart's character, is not interested in Grace Kelly, his girlfriend, until she goes on into the apartments on the other side of his apartment, because Jimmy Stewart spends most of the movie looking out his window into other apartments until Grace Kelly becomes an object for him to view, for him to be a voyeur. And Hitchcock was very aware of the voyeurism of cinema, while Mulvey uses that as an example of here's how women are objectified within the diegesis of a film very explicitly. Like, Hitchcock was doing that intentionally as well. I could go on about this all day. So Mulvey talks a lot within this essay about how narratives are built to center a man as an actor and a woman as an object. And the language of cinema itself, the camera itself, is meant to create less and less distance between the audience, who is assumed to be a man because of the mode of production, between him and the people on screen, so that he can both feel identification with the protagonist and as if he is able to attain the objects, the women on screen. And this has a lot to do with how sex is portrayed, because when you're talking about a sex scene, I want to create a world wherein everyone on screen is a person. You're not just looking at them because they're attractive. I mean, that can be part of it, but you're also looking at them and their relationship developing, not just looking at people as objects, as pieces of meat that you can desire. Whether it's a man or a woman, doesn't matter. I want to create some humanity within my sex scenes. And Mulvey has something to say about what cinema does to women, which I think is really interesting and important. I'm going to read it. Going far beyond highlighting a woman's to-be-looked-atness, cinema builds the way she is to be looked at into the spectacle itself. Playing on the tension between film as controlling the dimension of time through editing and narrative, and film as controlling the dimension of space, changes in distance in terms of the camera, and also editing. Cinematic codes create a gaze, a world and an object, thereby producing an illusion cut to the measure of desire. So what this says to me is that film can teach you how to look at and value the images. Cinema builds the way she, a woman, is to be looked at into the spectacle itself. The spectacle for Mulvey is her way of saying the narrative, but also the idea of the pleasure of looking. The question that I need to ask myself when I'm directing is, how do I want people to look at this? How do I want people to see this? How do I want people to see these actors? How do I want people to see this narrative and feel about this scene? Now, Mulvey has a solution for the male gaze here, which is that we need to free the look of the camera into its materiality in time and space, and the look of the audience into dialectics, passionate detachment. Mulvey wants to get rid of voyeurism, but I don't want to get rid of voyeurism. Scopophilia, which is what she calls the love of looking, that feels like it's something that can be for everybody. No matter who you are sitting in the audience, you don't have to be a man to be an actor. You can be any gender, any race, any sexuality. You looking can be a voyeur, but the question is, what are we gazing on? Because if we want equality, if I want equality, I want a measure of equity, I want people to be seen as people, what are we gazing at? And what I want to gaze at is a relationship. I want that connection between my two characters to be the focus of this gaze. The focus of, what did she say? The focus of the illusion cut to the measure of desire. And I think Bridgerton accomplishes that. It does create the relationship as that object at the center of desire. It successfully focuses on both a man and a woman in the position of actors, especially with the characters of Kate and Anthony. I'm not super surprised about this because Bridgerton is based on romance novels, and romance novels are written by and large for women and by women, though there are quite a few not written by men, quite a few written by non-binary people, and quite a few featuring relationships between men and women and non-binary people. And they're very much focused on women's pleasure and women choosing to find happiness through love. So I'm not surprised that this new aesthetic that I've found has come from the romance novel era, the aesthetic that takes the male gaze and says, actually, we are going to be gazing at everybody. We're going to be looking at everyone as an object, but we're going to be doing it through the lens of the connection between the two people. And these two people come into the story as equals. I could go on and on about how the mise-en-scène in Bridgerton season 2 really privileges relationships. There's this one scene where Daphne comes into the parlor at Aubrey Hall at the Bridgerton's country house with her son, and the whole family is in the parlor, and you see them all there within the frame. They all rush up to Daphne, say hello to the son, and then you see a shot over the shoulder, and there's always, in this season, there's very rarely a single shot. It's always over the shoulder or with somebody in the foreground or the background showing you how the people within this world are so connected and love each other so much. But you see alone on the other side of the room, Eloise sitting there reading a pamphlet about feminism and not interested in the baby. She wants to separate herself from family life, from all of these expectations. And it's really interesting and says a lot about the relationship between Eloise and her family. As her family beckons her over and she comes over and holds the baby, and there's a bit of distance there. And also says a lot about Eloise's mindset. I mean, there's so many examples of this, but what I want to do is show an example of a scene that is incredibly sexy and very sexual, but there's no sex, and we don't break people up into parts. We show the relationship that is building between them. And it's Kate and Anthony are in the garden, and a bee comes along. All right, headphones at the ready. I am going to watch this live with you and talk you through it. As context, Anthony's father died in front of him when he was 18 in this story. I think he's 30 now, but when he was 18, his father got stung by a bee, like right there, and immediately, like anaphylactic shock, died. So that is what a bee represents to Anthony. It's the fear of death, the fear of losing someone you love. And this is from episode 3 of season 2 of Bridgerton. The episode's called The Bee in Your Bonnet. It is the very last scene of the episode. Here we go. So we have Kate riding her horse back after a contemplative ride. She gets off. Anthony is in the background there. They're in the frame together, showing that they are together. She looks at him. She sees him. She is the one acting, being the actor in terms of what Mulvey means.
Is your sister?
They're in the frame together again. She is approaching him. The distance between them is closing, symbolizing their relationship growing, symbolizing them becoming closer.
And I did not declare myself.
I would like to thank you for not doing
She should not be disappointed for long.
They walk together. She again watches him. He is trying to walk away from her. It shows the tension in the relationship.
Everyone's sitting there.
This is still a two-shot. Even though they're looking at each other, we're not seeing what they're looking at. We are privileging the distance between them.
Your feelings.
And see, he's in the foreground, kind of blurry.
No. All you are doing, my lord, is toying with the emotions of an impressionable...
See, instead of a over-the-shoulder shot, and look, they're on opposite sides of the frame. They're arguing.
I know she wishes to be happy.
This is precisely what I wish for her. I can assure you, happiness is not your strength. Exasperation, perhaps. Vexation, most definitely. The only feeling...
So now he sees the bee. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that we're looking at him look at the bee. We never look at a close-up of her breast. It's the face. And then when she sees the bee, that's when we see a close-up of the bee on her. It stings her. We don't see the sting. We see his reaction to the sting. Their faces together. His face, his distress, and her concern all of a sudden. We getting close on him to show his reaction, to be within his panic attack. They become closer and closer. She presses his hand onto her, but we still see their faces in the shot. See how they're becoming closer. They're both feeling their hearts beating. They're, again, faces coming closer. She lowers her voice. Despite the fact that they're touching each other on their chests in a potentially sexual place, we're only focused on the way that their expressions are reading. We're not focused on the sexuality of their body parts, but on the will they kiss, will they close the distance between them. And as soon as that horse neighs, they step apart. They're out of frame with each other. He runs away, completely off frame. and then she runs away as well behind a wall, and now they're separated. And then he runs and does the same thing, catches his breath. They're in the same place, mentally, emotionally. Panicking, not knowing what's happening, their world's turned upside down. And that's the end of the episode. So throughout this scene, which is very much a visual representation of Kate and Anthony's relationship, of the progression of their relationship, the camera never goes to places that are inherently sexual. A bee stings her right here, but the only time we see the bee's position is in relation to when Kate sees it on herself. We see Anthony's terror more than we see her chest. When they're holding their hands on each other's hearts, it's about how that touch affects them. The face is what is privileged. The connection between them is what is privileged. As the scene continues, they become closer and closer within the frame, and the frame itself becomes engulfed within the connection between the two of them. So we start from, medium shot or a cowboy, where they're on opposite ends, into where their faces are still at opposite ends, but they're very, 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 very close. And we see the emotion. And so that's what I mean when I say that the object of desire, the thing that we're cutting to, is the desire between Kate and Anthony, is their relationship that's building. And that is how Bridgerton, season 2 especially, because there's only 2 sex scenes, one like the second to last, maybe last episode, and then one at the very, very end as sort of an epilogue, as sort of a nod to the fact that season 1 was something you did not want to watch with your parents at all. I didn't make that mistake, don't worry. This visual language of the relationship as the object of the gaze, and us as an audience of any kind being a voyeur of that relationship, that is the type of visual language I want to develop with Kaleidoscope. Because that scene that we just watched, there was no real sexuality. There wasn't even a kiss. There was a lot of almost kissing. There was a lot of panting. But there wasn't sex. It was really just a scene of trying to comfort someone who's in the middle of a panic attack. Which is something that is in Kaleidoscope, because Jonah, the male lead, does have panic attacks, and his anxiety is something that I am exploring with the narrative. So that's instructional for me on a micro level, but also on a macro level. This language here in Bridgerton, this visual language of eroticizing a relationship, is one that can help create a more equitable depiction of people on screen, of sex positivity in terms not only of just sex as something that is good and that shouldn't be judged, but also as sex positivity as privileging pleasure for everybody. All of that was in this scene, and there's absolutely no sex in it. Kudos season 2 of Bridgerton for creating a new paradigm for this gaze-centered cinema. And because I love 2 shots, I love the relationship of actors within the frame together. This is something that I can very easily translate into my own style and take with me as I revise Kaleidoscope and think about how it's going to look on screen, and then when I finally get to actually putting it on screen, thinking about the relationship as the fetishistic object that we all want to look at, that we all want to be voyeurs of. I hope you enjoyed this film nerd edition of Cake Fight Presents The Making of Kaleidoscope. I love sharing my ideas about film theories, and I'm really excited to be able to do it on YouTube, especially within the context of the movie that I am making and that I am revising right now. If you want to see more of this kind of analysis content, please hit the like button and definitely subscribe, because I come out with a new video about my process in making this film and my thoughts on films in general every week on Wednesday. Thank you again so much for watching, and like I said, I will see you next week with another one of The Making of Kaleidoscope.